Here we go on a Sunday morning. Just after 8 o'clock, I'm Bryan Feldman, and this is Out of Line. We are here same time every week on Fox Sports Radio, 98.9 FM and 1340 AM. Pre- and eventually post-pandemic flagship of the Vegas Golden Knights. Also here, former UNLV quarterback, only 6 years removed from leading UNLV to their last bowl game. My co-host, Caleb Herring, who social distanced himself from the show last week by getting stuck in SoCal.
I like that.
Glad to see you made it back.
Hey, I'm glad I made it back. It was actually kind of fun in SoCal. You know, they weren't as locked down as I thought they would be. There was stuff that was now they are. They're back on stay-at-home orders after the spike. But no, it was a good weekend to get away. I thought I'd be back in time for the show, but got trapped there late Saturday night and didn't feel up to hitting the road. So
now you're back.
Made the mature decision. A younger me would have,
You'd have been here.
I'd been here. I'd been, 2 a.m. hiking it in, but I made the safe choice.
The younger you, how do you think I feel?
Old. If I could sum it up in a word, old.
I'm amazed. If I live next door, I need to live where Bobby Machado lives, and then I could be here for sure. I just have to roll out of bed.
Yeah.
Also here, producer Chris Magnum Chapman, and he makes sure of 3 things. The studio is virus-free, the show is on the air, and soccer is on the studio flat screen. It's a must, right, Chris?
Yeah, except it's only the ESPN highlights of the women's tournament. I don't think there's any soccer on right now. I'm not sure. Maybe. But,
no, probably not.
No.
But a pretty emotional scene
meet
at
the press, even better.
That was actually the first team sport played in the United States, and pretty emotional, man. They all got down on one knee. I don't know if you saw that, wearing the Black Lives Matters T-shirts and armbands, and I thought it was really cool, man. Pretty damn emotional.
Yeah, so some sports and some outlets are getting it right. They're all connected to what's going on in the world, and I think that was a show of that. Like you said, the first sport in the States to be played and doing it that way and paying that tribute, it was awesome. I logged in to play FIFA for the first time in a while, which I do. I play soccer on my PS4. I'm a gamer, guys, if you didn't know. But I logged in, and there was like a message, like a Black Lives Matter message, and talking about social justice and using that platform to send that message out, which FIFA is probably one of the most globally played video games in the world. So it's to have that kind of impact. This is like the biggest social movement that we've ever experienced in the history of mankind.
I'm driving down Las Vegas Boulevard yesterday, and I see it on the big screen at Bally's, Black Lives Matter, and they're actually sending subliminal messages to everybody out there. And that's doing something, man, because the one thing you said, Caleb, at the very beginning of this when we first had our conversation was the lack of education that most of us have.
Yeah.
And, I've honestly taken that time, and I'm educating myself,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty disgusted how little I know. But it's my definition of maturity. You know what my definition of maturity is?
What's that?
The more I realize, the less I know, the more mature I become. Meaning every day I wake up, I realize I know less than I thought I did yesterday, which means I'm getting old.
That's a good one.
But
I think the lack of education is a big role, right? Because I had this conversation with a friend of mine, and I grew up in a very diverse area. Where I grew up in New Jersey, there are people from all over the world who live where I grew up. A lot of people who speak Spanish, a lot of people who speak Eastern European languages, a lot of Orthodox Jewish people. I mean, there are literally people from all over the world where I grew up. And New Jersey actually became the first state in the country recently to where Black history is going to be taught as a subject. And, it's pretty awesome to think that
man.
the state
really
I grew
is.
up in is kind of leading, and they should. Right, because of the diversity in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that I'm learning now that I really did not know. Like, I had no idea. And I've been to Washington, D.C. a bunch of times.
Right.
I never saw the statue of Abraham Lincoln.
Dude, that's one of the most. And so when the whole debate about that statue came up, it was, to me, because when I first saw it was when I was a kid and I went to Washington, D.C. And
Did you get it right away?
I saw it, yeah. So when I saw it as a child, I was disturbed by it. And it was like a tour that I was on. And the tours, they're telling me what this statue is. They're like, this is the Emancipation statue. This is what it means. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, that is not what I see. I see
it's not funny. I don't mean to laugh, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
And this is like you said, the education and the how we didn't even realize as a nation that subliminally is not okay. Because
racist.
Like I'm watching
statue in the nation's capital.
They're describing what it's supposed to mean to me. And I'm looking at him and I said, that's just a statue of
and the size of it. monument.
Right.
It should be God.
And that's what
I mean.
I'm
Seriously,
like, it's a statue of a white man, Abraham Lincoln or not, whoever, standing over a cowering black guy saying, "You can be free now." I'm like, that to me is the subliminal white supremacy that America has celebrated throughout history.
Truly,
it's crazy to me.
Amazing.
As a kid, I was like 12 years old when that hit me. It dawned on me like that doesn't look appropriate.
I went to Washington D.C. once, and I went to apply for a job. I got an opportunity to go out there for the Associated Press years ago, and I took the time. I ended up getting snowed in, and I got to stay an extra day. So I took the time to go and walk around and see a few of the sites. Two of the things that absolutely amazed me were the Abraham Lincoln statue. Like, is that God? Because it looks like Abraham Lincoln. Number one. And number two was the Vietnam Wall. Really set me back a bit. That just kind of like, wow, when you see just name after name of senseless dead guys that defended this country in the most useless war ever was really, really impactful for me as well. But let's move on, not turning this into that show. But I'll tell you what, man, the bottom line is no question about it. It really is disgraceful that for many, many years, people have gone there and looked at this monument and marveled at it. When I saw it, just like you, the very first time, I'm like, wow, that's kind of embarrassing. My first thought was like where somebody does something you think that was my first thought, like how embarrassing that is for all of us.
Right.
Anyways, also following the rules and in the break room with mask on and responding to all of today's social media questions and comments, our intern and social media director, The Wiz!
Nobody beats the Wiz. Nobody beats the Wiz.
The only intern in the country with his own theme music. It's pretty incredible. Listen, the show's also streaming on the LV Sports Network, and if you're brave, you can see us on Facebook Live. The page is called Outta Line. That's OUTTALINE. You can also follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at Outta Line on Fox LV. That's at Outta Line Fox LV. And since the show is live, your calls are welcome. The Fox Sports Residential Bancorp studio line is 702-876-1340.
Hi, this is Bubby, and it's time for What's on Tap.
What's on Tap, sponsored by title sponsor Residential Bancorp. Whether purchasing a new home or refinancing the home you already own, Residential Bancorp is the company to turn to for all your home financing needs. Residential Bancorp, funding America one neighborhood at a time. On Tap, the most unjust draft in sports history. Maybe the most intriguing version of Fact This ever is coming up today, featuring the host of Straight Outta Vegas, heard by over 1 million listeners nationwide on Fox Sports Radio, my good friend Bernie Fratto. And Caleb's back, so is S&B with C, talking Las Vegas Raiders, all that coming your way. If you're looking to buy a home or to refinance the home you currently own, choose a company you can trust. We're local, we're live, Residential Bancorp, funding America one neighborhood at a time. And before we get into Nightcap, which is what I want to talk about initially, that the NHL Draft is the draft that I'm speaking of, I think is the most unjust draft in NHL history, and not just in NHL history, in professional sports history. I thought it's sickening what they did. I don't know why, because you've got a great player coming up. There's been a lot of great players. I mean, Wayne Gretzky, the greatest of all time. They didn't make a lottery for him, but we'll talk about that in 1 minute. Before we get into all that, guys, I really wanted to mention real quickly UFC. I don't know if any of you got a chance to see it at the Apex last night. It was on ESPN, but the main event, the fight, was absolutely incredible. Probably one of the greatest. It was a lightweight fight last night. It went to full 5-round decisions. I didn't see the fight live. I watched the highlights of it. And Promier, I believe is his name. This guy,
Dustin Poirier.
Poirier. 10 wins, I think the second most since like 2015. But these guys, Caleb, they beat the living crap out of each other. I mean, literally in round 2, if you were watching it, you couldn't ask for a better fight. Chris, I don't know if you saw it.
I saw the highlights of it.
Oh, my
just
God.
Now.
I mean, let me just tell you, this is knockdowns, okay? There were no knockdowns in the fight, which is absolutely amazing considering it. But total strikes. Poirier threw 289, and Dan Hooker, his opponent, threw 283. Poirier landed 208 of 289. That's 72%. And Hooker landed 182. Can you imagine?
Move out of the way.
In 5 rounds getting hit almost 300, they're over 200 times. And listen to this, what they call significant strikes. Now, these hurt you. These leave a mark, all right? 231 thrown by Poirier and 253 by Hooker. 153 landed and 155. I mean, it was just a bloodbath. Both these guys looked like they had just come out of a meat grinder with their face.
Yeah,
and I mean,
this is probably, if you're a UFC like avid fan, this is probably what you love about the sport the most, and this is probably why I don't watch it as much. These kind of brawls are like, they're
why
great.
your
They're
son will never be a UFC fighter.
There's no way. God, if he comes back and says that, I'll disown him.
You know what, real quickly, you know what I told Jacob? If I didn't say this on the air before, years ago I took Jacob to a team event. They used to have this team. It was Ultimate Fighter, but I can't remember what it was. But they had teams, and Jacob was just intrigued by it. And he's like, "Wow, Dad, that's so cool." And stuff. I go, "Listen, if you want to be a UFC fighter, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go out in the garage. I'm gonna kick the crap out of you and throw $20 on you. That's what it's like to be a UFC fighter."
I think you've told me that, but it was off air. But no, this is the only issue. It's thrilling. It's entertaining. I get it. We love combat sports like football, which is, to me, it's a combat sport, just not as gruesome as the UFC is. UFC is different. It's like gladiators in an octagon, basically. But this is the prime example of what UFC can look like and should look like to most fans. But the only issue I have is when you score this, how does this equal somebody winning and somebody losing? Because to me, like you said, both fighters are absolutely beaten and battered at the end of it. You say the percentage of punches landed, but there's so many more like takedowns and the control.
Well,
like,
Hooker, they say in that second
Hooker
round,
had control of the fight.
Question,
so there's
the most significant damage was done by him.
Absolutely. So and that's what, if not a knockout, if not a TKO or somebody seizing up on the ground. When it goes to a decision, it's like, take your pick. Like, if both people have made it to this point and both are bloodied and battered, how do you say this person
you score
won?
it for rounds. Put it this way. I agreed with the scoring of the fight. I did think Poirier won the majority of the rounds. But bottom line is, Adelaide
like
Bird,
this,
thank God, wasn't one of the judges in this fight. That's all I got to say.
It'd have been a draw.
It would have been.
The rematch been scheduled for next week.
It would have been a 5-round draw with Adelaide Bird somehow. And I'm sorry because I love her husband, Robert Bird, who is one of the ushers at UNLV at all the games. You know Robert, don't you? Such a good guy.
I guess I just can't. I don't get the scoring good enough. I get it as, like somebody knocks somebody out, somebody's a submission, tap out. I get all that. But to me, the scoring aspect of it just makes it a little bit strange.
But you have to find a way to judge the
right.
fight.
It's just very hard to. And that's why I would lean more towards boxing, because I can. Maybe at the end they should scrape up
whoever bled the most or something. You lose. I don't know. But like I said, I mean, it's so hard because I'm hypocritical because I do enjoy watching it. I would never be an advocate of it as far as
it's like Grand Theft Auto. Like we can play Grand Theft Auto, but. God forbid, nobody, I think, would go out and do Grand Theft Auto. Right. That's not. There's a difference. We can be entertained by John Wick, but we're not John Wick.
No doubt about it.
We're not going out and pulling the John Wick stunts.
It's tragic because, again, and this will be a subject for years to come, but I want to see 20 years down the road the CTE results on the brains of a lot of these UFC fighters because, like I've said for a long time, what do you think is more catastrophic, getting hit to the head with protective gear made to protect your head or a shin bone square to your temple? I gotta believe that number 2 is probably going to be worse.
The thing about it with CTE, it doesn't matter how much, like the helmets that you make, and that's the science of it, which is like, I don't understand the Antonio Brown thing, why they were so adamant about getting this new helmet. The science of concussions, it doesn't matter what kind of helmet you wear.
No, it's the shaking of your brain inside your head.
The helmet can prevent skull fractures, but when you're talking about CTE, that's the brain moving around in that gray matter inside of the skull. At least the protective
headgear is something.
It's something. You don't have fractured skulls.
Correct.
Like you won't have any damage to the structure of your skull with the helmet, supposedly. But
no broken orbital bones.
Exactly.
And things like that.
Those kind of things are definitely, like, UFC is going to have. But you're talking about the long-term brain damage. I think both sports, if you look at it, will have comparable, damage to the brains at the end of the career. So I mean, it's at some point you got to say, well, these head injuries are just going to be a lasting effect of any of these sports. Football, that's why I call it a combat sport, because you're going to have those kind of injuries and gruesome injuries at that. At the end of your career, you look at some of the NFL players that have retired, and the way they walk around, it's like, I didn't know he was 52. He looks like he's 87.
That's amazing.
At the way these guys are damaged and beaten, you could see down the line, UFC is not that old of a sport. But down the line, when these guys are
All
50
of them.
plus years old, it's going to be like.
And Caleb, the NFL doesn't destroy your ears. I mean, your
Yeah,
ears,
the
it destroys
cauliflower ears,
the
it's
cauliflower.
like,
And also, one of the things that's very little talked about, they're a podiatrist's dream because the feet on these guys, because you're flat-footed, you're on that canvas all the time with no socks on or shoes,
Yeah,
and your feet
calloused
get
up.
flat.
Yeah.
They get flat. And a lot of these guys, you look at, they're flat-footed. The arch in their foot goes away after a period of time.
I would love to see their shin bones because like
seriously.
training that I've seen videos on YouTube
Oh
of people
my
just
God.
kicking bamboo trees to strengthen their shins. And all the the cartilage and the damage that they're doing there, the scar tissue. These guys probably aren't going to be able to walk at 50.
I'm going to end this on this one, and it's this: Dana White, pay these guys.
Hockey players, as you know, are warriors. They don't give up. They come to play every game.
It's time for Nightcap, a cupful of the Vegas Golden Knights. From highlights to interviews to special events, the puck starts here.
Yeah. The NHL lottery took place, phase one. Why do they have to use phases for everything now? But they called it phase one of the NHL lottery draft, first time ever. And one of the worst teams record-wise in NHL history before the pandemic hit and the season was stopped. The Detroit Red Wings were nothing short of putrid. This is a team that I feel in series against a number of AHL teams might have lost 5-game series against them. That's how bad this Detroit Red Wings team is. If ever a team deserved the number one pick, it was this season's Detroit Red Wings. And don't sit here and think I'm a homer, okay? It has nothing to do with that. This is ridiculous. It really is. I mean, like I said, it makes sense in the NBA. I always thought it did. I know it started with Patrick Ewing when he came out such a dominating player out of Georgetown back in, 85, I believe, or 86. But the thing is that made sense because in the NBA, you've got a 12-man roster. You got 5 men on the floor, and we have seen many times, a la LeBron James, one man can carry an NBA franchise like he did as a very young man to the finals with the Cleveland Cavaliers when he was all by his lonesome. So the bottom line is one man can make a difference. In the NHL, unfortunately, one man can't be on the floor, on the ice the entire game other than a goaltender. So these guys, you can't take a superstar player and put him on a decent team with a lottery in a sport like the NHL. And the bottom line is, this year, this guy, Alexis Lafreniere, coming out, is the best player in the NHL draft by far this year, head and shoulders above anyone else. He is another Austin Matthews, another Connor McDavid. If you're not familiar with the greatest players and the most dynamic players in the National Hockey League right now, that's who he is. And he is going to end up going to a team that has a shot at winning the Stanley Cup still left in one of the final, 22 teams, Chris, that he's got 24 teams left in. One of 8 teams that get bumped out. And one of 8 teams.
There's 8 teams that are not eligible. So out of the 24, there's 16 other teams that have
16 teams that have a shot. Because here it is. One of those 16 teams is guaranteed to get the number one pick. It's that the Red Wings are stuck at number 4. That's what they're getting. One of the worst records in NHL history leading to the break, and they are getting the number 4 pick in the draft in a roster that carries 4 lines and 3 defensive lines and 2 goaltenders. And you're going to tell me it's disgusting. Chris, seriously, you've got your finger on the pulse of the NHL. You have for a few years now when you've gotten yourself really morphed into hockey. I've been involved in this sport for years. What do you think of this?
Well, I think it's hysterical. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it.
Why?
There is. I mean, it's. I'm not sure why the NHL had to do this now and why they couldn't wait until after the play-in round was over. But there's a scenario out there, and step 1 has already taken place, where the New York Rangers could win the Stanley Cup and end up with the number 1 overall draft pick. How ridiculous would that be? There's now scenarios where the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, could end up with the number 1 pick, meaning they would end up with this Alexis Lafreniere. I think the idea that the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup and then ending up with the number 1 overall pick would completely delegitimize the process here.
It would kill it.
You know, I mean,
I just don't know what they're thinking, Chris. Why do this? Because you've got this dynamic to mix it up a little bit. You've got this great player. I mean, the bottom line is this kid is, when you look at guys and you say this is this is no miss. That's who this kid is. I mean, unless this kid gets hurt, which is always a possibility in professional sports. But if he doesn't and he stays healthy, this kid has the potential to be as good as anybody in the league. As good as Wayne Gretzky, who knows? But put it this way, you can't say he can't be that good. That's how dynamic of a skater this kid is, and the Red Wings won't get him. It's that simple.
Well, it's a shame, too, because Detroit, obviously, good hockey city.
A guy like this, Chris, can start rebuilding, you rebuilding to the future. That's how good he is. It's just a crime.
The thing is, if a team like, I don't know, a team that wasn't very good, that is in this play-in, like the Minnesota Wild, if somehow they end up with this pick, all right, you're like, you know what, that's fine, because they would have been in the lottery anyway. But if somehow the Pittsburgh Penguins or, I don't know, say Edmonton, if they lose their first-round game or their play-in game, and it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Can you imagine Edmonton with Connor McDavid?
I know, it's
oh
lunacy.
My God, man. You might have the two best players in the NHL on the same team. How unfair is that,
It's
man?
a super team.
If you are a fan of a team in the Pacific Division, you got to be like, what the hell is this?
Toronto as well, Chris.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Toronto as well. Austin Matthews. Oh my God! Like I said, I don't want to beat it to death because again, it sounds like I'm a crying Detroit fan, which I am. By the way, do you like my hat? My son got me this for Father's Day. Pretty cool, right?
I like
the
it.
original
Yeah,
six,
original
man.
six.
That's pretty cool.
Isn't that pretty
Man.
sweet?
That is
Yeah,
pretty
I was
cool.
really. I didn't take my stickers off because I'm only wearing it here, and I was going right back on the shelf at home. But I wanted to wear it today in honor of the NHL draft. And again, obviously, we haven't talked a lot about, and we will very soon, about all four of the major professional team sports in the United States. And I've made some pretty strong statements about that. I think we all have. We've all made our predictions. Yeah. So again, we're going to bring that up in the next segment. I want you to know that that's coming up. But in closing on the NHL, Chris, you know, Gary Bettman seems bent and dented on playing hockey like every commissioner of all the major sports do. But I just don't see this happening. More and more players continue to test positive. You're now bringing them back in. And the big problem with the NHL is you have players coming from other countries, even the ones that are playing locally. They're not in their home, the city where they're going to play at. Yeah. You still haven't determined the hub cities, which all this is leading me to believe that somehow this is going to drop off and go away. But again, we're going to hear in a little bit after the break about why it's not.
Yeah, I don't know at this point. I'm like 50-50. I do know this, and people could hate me for it. I don't want the NHL to play games in Las Vegas. It's that simple. We had over 1,000 cases in Clark County yesterday. I don't look. I love hockey, right? We all love sports. It's really not that important.
Unless they can find a way to put oxygen masks on these guys, like full-blown helmets with oxygen masks, and somehow do that, you can't play this game.
There's two separate issues here, because if you're talking about open up sports to where fans can come and participate and be in the arena, no, there's absolutely no way that any sport at this point should be thinking about doing that. But the health risk to the public, if you're talking about, and I heard.
Well, that's why Vancouver was out because the NHL refused to meet their requests as far as player health and safety.
That's the thing about it. The health risk to the public is the way that, in theory, they're talking about it. From what I've heard, these bubbles that they're planning on creating for the players and the organization, everybody who's directly involved. It is incumbent upon those people in the bubble to take it seriously. And then the outside effect of the community, like Las Vegas, has no bearing on what happens inside of the bubble. So that if it happens, we've shown, though, as a society, we are incapable of following the rules necessary.
Oh my God.
So I don't trust that it can happen. But in theory, with the professional athletes and the professional staff taking the appropriate precautions of maintaining the bubble, I see no reason why it couldn't.
But I mean, you've got officials, you still got stadium workers.
And this is what I'm saying. Everybody, the bubble has to be completely
so the guy who sweeps the floor, you're going to tell him for $10 an hour, you're not allowed to see your family for 3 months.
You're bubbled.
I got you. Here's what I'm going to say closing on this, and I'm going to ask Bernie about this and some thoughts. Things like the PGA Tour. golf is a game, as we know, or an event, a sporting event, where quiet is of the essence. People being quiet. Can you really look at records like yesterday when Brandon Todd and, of course, Dustin Johnson, who has definitely had problems between the ears in major events before, they both shoot 61. First time two players ever shot a 61 on the same day in the PGA Tour in the same round, same day. And, how much easier is it? Golf is the one sport where these guys probably love not having fans because there is no pressure. You got the TV cameras, but the pressure is relinquished. So is it fair? You see a guy like Brandon Todd, he's won this could be his third tournament that he's won. How good is this guy? Is he throwing up these great numbers because there's nobody, although he did miss the cut in the last two tournaments, but you still say how much different, like guys who might be no names now have a real chance because you alleviate yourself of the pressures of the huge galleries.
Well, you could say the same thing about some other, like if basketball were to come back and there's no arenas, like imagine making a clutch free throw down the stretch of a tight game.
No, I get you, but you don't have that excitement.
It's not the entirety of the sport.
Right.
Yeah, but in golf, definitely.
Golf is like, I'm watching these guys throw darts.
You're
now.
out there at peace with yourself. Like my stroke is just going to be perfect because I'm not worried about messing up.
Phil Mickelson would have 5 more majors if there were no fans. Trust me. The biggest choke artist early before he won his first major ever on Sundays, and he would have played great with no fans. Listen, we're going to take a break. On the other side, Bernie Fratto, straight out of Vegas, is joining the show. You won't want to miss this.
Fact this. If you don't like the facts, take your ass back to bed. Fact this.
Fact. Last Sunday, the general consensus on this show was that none of the 4 major professional team sports, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL, and yes, even the NFL, will compete or complete their seasons in 2020. This is completely inaccurate and far from a fact, according to a good friend of mine who happens to be one of the hardest working and most knowledgeable men in sports broadcasting, the host of Straight Outta Vegas, heard nationally by over 1 million listeners every Saturday night on Fox Sports Radio. Bernie Fratto, first and foremost, Bernie, I know Saturdays are late nights for you, and I appreciate you being on, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. And by the way, just to clarify, it becomes a semantical conversation because what you just said was, will they complete their seasons? And I can tell you, even in the throes of the baseball negotiations, if you want to call them that, they were more like a game of chicken and a test of wills. I talked to many insiders, said, we're going to start, we just hope we finish. So I can tell you, for all 3 major sports, we'll set football aside, we can talk about it at the end if we have time, but all systems go, although they can't make themselves bulletproof, but there are a lot of protocols in place to ensure that the seasons will at least start.
Yeah, I see that, Bernie, and that's why I said compete and then complete, because I was saying they're not even going to compete, and now it does seem as though they will compete. But I still wonder, like with hockey we talked about before the break, these players coming from all over the world, and even locally, they're not where they're going to be, and we still don't even know where the hubs are. So they have to come back, get tested, go through quarantine, and then actually have an NHL season. And we keep hearing more and more cases in every sport, whether it be with the administration people, the coaching staff, or the players. And I just don't see the numbers going down.
Well, let's give this some perspective. Take the NBA. 302 players tested last week, 16 tested positive. That's 5%. So that falls within the societal norms. For all the people who test, 95% don't have it. And the hospitalizations are being reduced, and the death count is way down. Of all the people who get it, 0.7% passed, unfortunately, now. And they don't really fall within the demographic of young major league athletes. The NHL is going to have the most rigorous daily testing protocol of the 4 sports. Every single night, those results are going to be obtained before they even leave their hotel rooms the next morning. And July 1st is Wednesday. They're not even going to be in camps till July 10th. You're going to see the hubs announced within the next week, and things are going to start to roll into action. They're still not going to play games probably till around August 7th is the earliest I heard. So the bottom line is they've got ample time to implement and go through the logistics of getting people in their various camps and bubbles or however you want to talk about it. Here's why I'm telling you for sure that they are going to give it every effort in the world. Take the NBA. They've got a little TV contract that for the playoffs alone will bring them $900 million. They've got to get to that playoff tournament. if the NBA leaves $900 million on the table, their econometric model and their CBA will be completely blown up. They'll have to start from scratch, and the salaries that the players have come to enjoy are going to go by the wayside. So they've got to give this an effort. Same with Major League Baseball. The owners are banking on that $787 million TV nest egg when the playoffs start after September 27th. They're going to carry 30-man rosters and a 60-man player pool. And if someone tests positive, there's no DL. They just quarantine for a few days till they're better and then come back when they're ready. So they're going to do the best they can to have safety protocols and safety nets. Again, you can't make yourself bulletproof, but at the same time, think about it, Brian. You mentioned the tests aren't going down. Well, why would they? We've had the perfect storm the past month. We had wall-to-wall, people packed like sardines on the streets of America for 3 weeks. Then you've got increased testing to the tune of about 500%. We're now doing 500,000 tests today in America. Everybody goes crazy about Texas. Well, they're doing 35,000 tests a day in the state of Texas alone. And then we've reopened, so there's more interaction between people. But having said all that, even though the positive cases are going up, the other two, what I think are more important statistics, have remained manageable.
He is Bernie Fratto. You can hear him every Saturday night at 11 o'clock. Straight Out of Vegas, the pregame show you always wanted. Bernie, such a great job with that show. I enjoy it tremendously. And real quickly back, with Major League Baseball, as you mentioned, and the revenue, and the big issue was, always the full prorated pay, which they finally agreed on, but 60 games in 66 days. Is that even possible?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, in a regular season, Brian, you play 162 games in 184 days. So it correlates. And one of the things I think that's going to help is everything is going to be regional. So you meld the AL West with the NL West and the NL Central with the AS Central and right on down the line. So if you're the California Angels, of those 60 games, you're going to play the 4 teams in your AL West division, Seattle, the 4 AL West teams in your division 10 times, and then the remaining people in your melded division 5 times. So you're never traveling out of your time zone. You're never going to have a flight that's probably more than 2 hours or 90 minutes, and that'll be few and far between. And I haven't seen the schedule, but I think there'll be longer series as well. So that's very doable. And, unless, again, barring some unforeseen catastrophe that we can't predict, or too many rainouts or earthquakes or some other disaster, they should be able to do it. Shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Going to be very interesting. I think it's going to make for some exciting baseball for all of us. 60 games. One of the things I've been seeing, and I know you had Todd Dewey on your show last night, some of the prop bets that I've been seeing for baseball are kind of interesting, Bernie, and I'm sure you're all over those. And also, what are they doing with all the bets that were made beforehand? Are they going to honor the odds on long shots that were the tickets that were got before the pandemic for a 60-game season?
Well, yes and no. So here's the situation on that. For all of the props, player props, division props, season total win props and such that were made prior to the pandemic, those are going to be refunded. However, if you bet on the Dodgers to win the World Series or the Yankees prior to March, that's going to be honored because it's presumed they will crown a champion. So that will hold. And there's a new series of props, like you just mentioned, a couple of really cool ones, I think. The over-under for the most home runs, the home run champion, is 20. So if you think they'll hit more than 20, that's the over.
Love the over.
Most wins. Will any team have more than 39.5 wins for an over-under? By the way, in 1878, there was a 60-game season, and the Boston entrant had 41 wins. And I think in the next week you're going to see props like the first X amount of RBIs, X amount of pitching wins, X amount of stolen bases. But my favorite prop by far, and I think this one's going to get some real action, will somebody hit 400 until 2020? Right now, the yes is plus 800. Here's why I think that is such a good bet. Yes. It's not a lock, but it's good value for the money. Here's my point. Since Ted Williams hit 406 in 1941, there have been 23 players in Major League Baseball history that have hit 400 over any random 60-game stretch during the course of a season. So it can be done. Somebody can get hot. Now, in order to cash the bet, there has to be at least 186 plate appearances, right, including walks, sacrifice flies, all that. less than that, you won't qualify for the bet. And as far as any other future action, 58 games will have to be played. But I think the door is also wide open for long shots like the Tampa Bay Rays, who were 22-1, now 17-1. Because of this odd, wacky, short season, they've got incredible depth and roster flexibility, a great bullpen, great starting pitchers. And so if someone gets hurt, something goes wrong, in their 60-player pool, they're going to be as deep as anybody out there. One final thing, the best analogy I can give for this season is to expect the unexpected in the sense that there really could be a long-shot team sneak through like the Chicago White Sox or the Texas Rangers or the Cincinnati Reds, and here's why. Let's pretend an amateur golfer played a professional golfer, but it was only a 4-hole match. Anything could happen in that 4-hole match. Bob Costas brags about the time he beat Tiger Woods once. On a par 3, 160 yards, he stuck his tee shot a foot from the pin, tapped it in for a birdie. Tiger had a par on the hole, so Costas beat him on that hole. In a short sample, you don't have the 162-game dog day when you got dog days of the season at the end. Players getting hurt, pull hamstrings, muscles, all that kind of stuff. And you don't have some of these younger teams that have a bunch of young stars that aren't used to playing a 162-game season. They've only got to navigate a 60-game season like college. So if you make it a short sample, the weaknesses that normally come to bear in a 162-game season aren't going to happen. I think you can expect the unexpected.
Again, Bernie Fratto, Straight Outta Vegas, Fox Sports Radio, nationally over 350 stations and 1 million listeners every Saturday night. You can check Bernie out right here on this station locally, Fox Sports Radio, 11 o'clock Saturday nights. Bernie, you said a lot there. I know the one question I was going to ask you, and you answered it, was how many at-bats, because I think it's, 502 at-bats for
plate appearances.
Yeah, for
remember,
plate appearances. No, you're right, plate appearances.
Yeah,
I got you. But and then 186. So does that correlate with the 60 games? Does that seem about right to you?
Yes, it does, because normally in a regular full-game season, it's 502 plate appearances to win a batting title, which is 3.1 times 162 games. You may not play 162 games, but as long as you have the requisite 502 plate appearances, you're eligible to win the batting title. This is similar in the Las Vegas prop. Will someone hit 400? You have to have 3.1 plate appearances propagated over 60 games, which comes out to a total of 186.
Makes perfect sense. And what a cool bet. And I really like the wager. Plus 800, I think, is great. And on the other end, I think the most overrated bet that people are talking about, the few people I've talked to, they like the Boston Red Sox. I think they're like 35 or 36-1. They have no pitching. Sale just had Tommy John surgery. That team has no staff. I think that's the biggest suckers bet on the board. And 36-1 is going to entice people to take it. What do you think of that? The odds on that one, Bernie?
Yeah, I specifically talked about that same thing last night, Brian, on my show and on Arnie Spanier's show. They've actually fallen to 46-1. You can get the Sox at 46-1, but in addition to Chris Sale, they won't have. They've got a ragtag Fugazi starting pitching staff that consists of Eduardo Rodriguez, a completely banged-up Nathan Eovaldi, Colin McHugh, who gets injured every Tuesday, and they signed a free agent named Martin Perez. I don't know who he is, and a 29-year-old journeyman named Ryan Weber. There's your pitching staff in Boston. And how was your day?
Yeah, I was going to say, we just talked about one of the Korean teams, didn't we? Bernie, last thing, and I got to talk about, we won't have time to go over football and all that, but one thing I did hear yesterday you talk about on your show was about the Dak Prescott situation in Dallas and how much money he's commanding, which I think is ridiculous to try to ask for more money than a guy like Russell Wilson. It doesn't make sense to me. But the bone I had to pick with you is you talked about his backup, and you made him sound like the second coming, like another Nick Foles, and you compared him to Teddy Bridgewater, but you talked about his statistics, and I want to be fair because statistically you just mentioned names, and when I hear these names mentioned with Andy Dalton, it makes me cringe, but you talked about statistics, 30,000 passing yards and other things, the company that he's in, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, and Matty Ice Ryan. I understand statistically, but Bernie, Andy Dalton has not won a playoff game. I've won more money betting against this guy in the playoffs than probably any bet I've ever made. And is that on his team? Was that on his former coach? Or is it on the fact that he doesn't win in pressured situations?
Well, first of all, there are objective truths and there are personal feelings. Your personal feelings have crafted your argument. Andy Dalton, by NFL standards, has had a very successful career. No, he hasn't won. And, by the way, neither has Dak. And here's the stat you alluded to. Since 2011, Andy Dalton is one of just 6 quarterbacks to do this. 30,000 passing yards, 200 passing touchdowns, 70 wins. Now, you've already mentioned Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan and Ben Roethlisberger, and you left one out, Tom Brady. Okay, that's not an accident. And I will tell you, I don't know what's going to happen with Dak. I do think there's tension between him and Jerry Jones, and he only wants a 3-year deal, and a lot of Cowboys wanted to lock him up for 4 or 5. Backup quarterbacks are huge. One of the things I talked about last night is that, 72 Miami Dolphins, the only undefeated team in history, did it with a backup quarterback, Earl Morrall. Yep. Carson Wentz went down a couple years ago, and Nick Foles stepped in. We don't know what the future holds. Hopefully Dak stays healthy, and hopefully Dak earns his money and everything comes out, because I think football's better when Dallas does well. It just is. They're polarizing. But make no mistake, Dalton is more than capable. He's going back to his hometown of Dallas. He took a little bit of a bad rap in Cincinnati. But let me tell you something. Cincinnati was not really a stellar franchise, but Andy Dalton did a better job than people give him credit for. Those stats don't grow on trees. Those are real stats.
Well, I agree, but there was nobody behind him for years, and Dak Prescott hasn't played nearly as long as Andy Dalton. If he had that kind of career, then we could judge him. I don't think Dak Prescott's worth the money, and you're right, he hasn't won either, but I've never been a big Andy Dalton fan, and you're right, it is a personal thing, but also, like I said, in the playoff games, I just haven't seen him step up. Could he do it in Dallas? It's his hometown. Why not? Bernie Fratto, again, Straight Outta Vegas, every Saturday, 11 o'clock at night. Don't miss the show. And Bernie, I'll do this for you. The bottom line is, if you want to learn about sports and in general, everything going on, and you want the actual facts, the statistics, there is nobody that's worked harder. And finally, Bernie, appreciate it as you've deserved to for a long time. Trust me, listen to this show if you like sports. You should be all over it like a hobo on a ham sandwich. That's for you, Bernie. I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for joining the show.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I appreciate people tuning in. The ratings have been very good for me, and I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary. And just one last thing about Andy Dalton, not to beat a dead horse. Look, he's not the second coming. He's not a savior. He's an insurance policy, but he's a damn good one. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Bernie. Appreciate you. We'll take a quick break. Again, that's Bernie Fratto, Straight Outta Vegas. Catch him right here on Fox Sports Radio every Saturday at 11 o'clock. We'll be right back. Wrapping up another Sunday morning here, about 10 minutes left. You are listening to Outta Line, Fox Sports Radio, 98.9 FM, 1340 AM, flagship of the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm Bryan Feldman. Sitting to my left on your radio dial, Caleb Herring, and right directly in front of me, man in the wheels of steels, Chris Magnum Chapman. And in the break room with his mask on and fully quarantined,
The Wiz! The Wiz!
That is Spencer the Wiz Ostrovsky. I haven't said that in a while. I just had to get it out to make sure I still had it.
Forgotten.
Hey, S&B with C. It is all about the silver and black with Caleb Herring and the Raiders right now. Will they play football? Won't they play football? We don't know. But one thing we do know, when they do play football, it will be here in Las Vegas, and they will be the Las Vegas Raiders.
If you haven't already and you live in Las Vegas, first of all, you need to go drive by Allegiant Stadium because it looks freaking awesome. I'm giddy because we're gonna have an NFL team. I've never lived in an NFL city, so I want this experience. I want the season to happen. More important, I want to be in the arena and watch live football. So, but if you haven't seen Allegiant Stadium, it's absolutely stunning to behold, if you will. But the Raiders may or may not have a season, but if they do have a season, they're optimistic about some of the things that they were able to do during the offseason. Obviously, building through the draft with Henry Ruggs and adding that explosive element to the offense to complement the run game that they found with Jacobs, of course, and to complement an efficient passer in Derek Carr.
And who last year out of nowhere became one of the best tight ends in football.
Yeah, Darren Waller.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So they've had pieces. They've put together an offense over the offseason. And one of the pieces that has really excited John Gruden is sort of the lesser talked about, if you will, Lynn Bowden, who's like a Swiss Army knife on offense. He's a running back / quarterback / wide receiver. He'll be used like that. From all indications on how they're talking about him, he's going to be the versatile player on offense. He can be plugged in at multiple, kind of like a Percy Harvin is what I would say to compare him to, where he can impact the game in a lot of different places like special teams, slot receiver, maybe some some reverses, some trick plays like that, things like that he can do, which excite you.
If
with
his leg heals.
Yeah. So that's really
The guy
exciting.
gets hurt, but has a catastrophic leg injury before he ever plays it down.
Well, hey, we're gonna assume health here. Hopefully, he recovers.
Maybe it's me. I mean, I come here. I come from Detroit. Every significant
You're
Lions
such a
player
Debbie
gets
Downer.
hurt.
You're a Debbie Downer. Is what
that what it is?
Detroit Debbie Downer.
Seriously.
That's one of the triple D. But more exciting, I think, and more important to the Raiders' success is the defensive side of the ball, which they have some pieces now on defense that at every level, which they anticipate
Wouldn't it be nice
will
if
be
they
helpful.
still had Khalil Mack right now?
It would be great, but they have a defensive end in Max Crosby who was very effective in his first campaign with the Raiders.
was.
But he's going to now have a linebacker help, which the linebacking core last year was abysmal, probably the worst unit of the defense.
That will be the most improved part of this team
Absolutely.
this year.
And with Corey Littleton coming over, he's going to have an impact on that immediately, right away. The X factor, I think, is Jonathan Abram at the strong safety position, where that would add to that third level. You also have some rookie cornerbacks that came in, but you don't know how much rookies will really have an impact. Jonathan Abram, even though we only saw him in the preseason last year, he showed that he was a playmaker, a big hitter at least. You worry about coverage. You maybe haven't seen enough of it at the NFL level, but he looks to make an impact at that third level. So the defense has built as well. So the Raiders really have done a good job for themselves at building the roster up. The approach, I guess, was build offense through the draft mainly, and then kind of fill in some of the holes on defense with free agency, which they've done. And I think we can expect, and we should expect, a playoff run from this Raiders team. The way they're presently constructed, all things, full go ahead, if the season even happens, the Raiders should be a playoff team. And it's not unreasonable for Las Vegas to expect to have a playoff team for the first season of NFL football in Las Vegas. And I'm excited about it. It's super exciting. I really hope so, but we'll see.
Here's a couple prop Raider bets for you guys. Chris, 10 wins plus 850. Are you going to bet it?
No.
How about, listen to this one, 16-0, 500 to 1. You going to bet it?
That's silly.
If I'm not betting 10 wins, I'm definitely not betting 16.
All right, how about 0-16, 300 to 1?
No, they'll beat the Chargers, they'll beat the Broncos.
But I mean, the bottom line is, well, who do you start, Caleb? If you have your choice of either one of these quarterbacks, Andy Dalton or Derek Carr?
How about Colin Kaepernick?
Jesus, no. I'm gonna say Derek Carr.
Yeah. I knew you would. I don't want to.
I like Derek Carr. Derek Carr's a good quarterback.
I know you
Colin
do.
Cowherd had he had a list of top 5 arm talents.
Is it his blue eyes? It's not his.
No, it's not.
Okay, I hope not.
He's mechanically sound. He makes good decisions. He's very accurate with the ball. He just doesn't.
Very accurate?
He's very accurate. He's an accurate passer.
I would say he's an accurate passer. Very would be a word that I wouldn't.
I don't know.
Not an adjective.
He's a very accurate passer. I like just watching the tape on him.
Are we talking about his brother David Carr? Before
he's accurate too, but Derek Carr is he just doesn't take the risk and make the big play down the stretch we want. He'll take the check down throw, and that, to me, that's not a problem when you're winning and the team's doing good. He doesn't put the ball in jeopardy a lot, but he's accurate when
I
he's
would
accurate.
like him better as a backup for Dallas than I would Andy Dalton.
I don't know what the hate of Derek Carr is. Nobody likes him.
And again, I want to
Why?
clear this up before we go because Bernie really did have some great stats on Andy Dalton. But again, Andy Dalton has played a long time. He hasn't been hurt a lot, and that should be said for him. He's been a durable quarterback with the Bengals, but it's never like they've had a terrible offensive line. He's had one of the most dynamic receivers in football.
Who's been injured
the last
for
couple
the greater
years.
majority of his career.
No,
he's
the greater majority of his career.
Injuries.
Look at his statistics. He wouldn't have those statistics. And, pretty good running back in the last couple of years in Joe Mixon. But my point is, I'm not saying, he's a bad quarterback. I'm just saying I don't think, I just can't. I don't care what his statistics say. I'm not going to mention him in the same breath as Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Aaron Rodgers. Are you? I don't care what his statistics say. Sometimes statistics, it's not that they lie, but they don't tell the entire story. All those guys have won pressured games, and everyone on that list has at least played in a Super Bowl.
Everybody on that list also has been on a good team.
But the thing is, Caleb, he hasn't won a playoff game,
and
that to me is where you can say Matt Ryan should have won a Super Bowl too if he doesn't give up a 28-3 lead. But again, he could end up being a great insurance policy for Dallas. The reason I like him there is because he's from there, and that can incentivize you to play better for a game or two, but long-term, and Bernie said he wasn't long-term either. Listen, I want to thank Bernie Fratto, Straight Outta Vegas. Please check that show out. You will see how good this guy is, and you will learn things that I don't even know where he Googles and finds some of his information. It's that good. Every Saturday at 11 o'clock right here on Fox, and it's national on over 350 stations. Also want to thank my co-host, Caleb Herring, for getting out of quarantine in California and coming back here. The producer extraordinaire, Chris Magnum Chapman, behind the wheels of steel. And, of course, in the break room, what would we do without him? Our intern and social media director.
The Wiz!
We appreciate y'all. Listen, we're here every Sunday, same time, same place, Fox Sports Radio, 98.9 FM, 1340 AM. I'm Bryan Feldman, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.